Have you ever seen someone so out of place, yet so unshakably composed, that it left you questioning your own reality? This is the story of Ethan Sinclair, a man who seemingly had it all: wealth, power, and respect. Yet, his life takes a sharp turn when he encounters Hannah Evans, a young homeless woman with a haunting presence that he cannot ignore. What begins as an act of curiosity evolves into a journey of self-discovery, redemption, and love that will challenge every perception of privilege and despair. And in the end, a shocking truth will turn their worlds upside down. The cacophony of New York City's rush hour buzzed in the background. Ethan Sinclair sat in his black Tesla, fingers tapping rhythmically on the steering wheel, as his car idled in a seemingly endless line of traffic. His Bluetooth earpiece buzzed with another call from his assistant, reminding him of the next meeting, the next deal, the next $1 million opportunity. Yet his attention wasn't on the numbers or the voice in his ear. It was drawn to the scene just beyond the car window. There she was, a young woman sitting on a weathered park bench near the corner of a bustling street. Her tangled auburn hair spilled over her face, partially obscuring her eyes, but Ethan caught glimpses of them, hollow, distant, yet piercing. Wrapped in a threadbare blanket, she seemed impervious to the cold wind biting through the late autumn air. Something about her stillness in the chaos, her quiet defiance against a city that never stopped, captured Ethan's gaze. For a moment, he wondered what brought her here. Who had she been before this? The light turned green, and impatient honks from behind jolted him back. He pressed the accelerator, leaving the woman and her worn blanket behind. That evening, Ethan's high-rise penthouse offered him no solace. The luxury apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, felt oddly hollow. He tried immersing himself in the usual distractions, reruns of a show he barely cared about, emails filled with corporate jargon, even the occasional mindless scroll through social media. But her image lingered, a solitary figure amidst a sea of indifference. Why did he care? He didn't know her. She wasn't the first homeless person he'd seen in the city. Yet there was something unsettling about the serenity she exuded, as though she had nothing left to lose and no reason to fight anymore. Finally, frustration bubbling, Ethan grabbed his coat and car keys. He didn't have a plan, just an inexplicable need to return to that street corner. The streets were quieter by the time Ethan arrived. The city's energy had dimmed, yet Hannah Evans sat in the same spot, her silhouette framed by the dim glow of a nearby lamppost. Ethan parked and approached cautiously. She didn't notice him until he stood a few feet away. Her gaze lifted slowly, her tired eyes locking onto his with a mix of wariness and irritation. "You shouldn't be out here like this," he said, his voice breaking the silence. Her lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. "And where exactly should I be? A luxury suite?" Her sharpness caught him off guard, and for a moment he considered walking away. But something rooted him in place. "I just wanted to check if you're okay," he said. She let out a dry laugh, her voice laced with both humor and exhaustion. "Do I look okay to you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this, being disarmed, feeling powerless. He had no response, no witty comeback or logical argument. "Can I get you something? Food? A blanket?" he asked finally. "Why?" she shot back. Her tone wasn't angry, just detached. "I don't know," he admitted, surprising even himself. Her gaze softened, if only slightly, but her guard remained up. "Thanks, but I don't need your charity. I've gotten this far without anyone's help." Ethan lingered for a moment, sensing there was more to her story, but knowing he wouldn't get it tonight. "Well," he said, retreating a step, I'll come back tomorrow. You don't have to, she replied, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I know, he said, before walking back to his car. Back in his apartment, Ethan couldn't stop replaying their exchange. Her sarcasm, her quiet defiance, her haunting eyes. They all gnawed at him. He wasn't sure why he cared so much. Maybe it was guilt, or curiosity, or perhaps something deeper. That night, as the city's lights twinkled below his penthouse, Ethan realized his life was about to change. For the first time in years, he was thinking about someone other than himself. Ethan Sinclair's office was perched on the 50th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in Manhattan. The panoramic windows showcased the city in its relentless glory. Taxis darting below, skyscrapers competing for the sky, and the hum of ambition vibrating through the streets. Inside, however, it was another world, silent, except for the quiet clicks of keyboards and the low hum of voices. Ethan stood at the head of a sleek glass conference table, flanked by his executive team. On the screen behind him was the latest projection for Sinclair Dynamics, his luxury tech firm. Numbers and charts filled the room as Ethan's VFO, Darren Chase, enthusiastically explained the company's unprecedented profits. But Ethan's mind was elsewhere. He barely registered Darren's excitement or the approving murmurs of the board members. All he could see was the young woman from the park, her hollow eyes and biting words replaying in his mind like a challenge he couldn't ignore. Ethan? Darren's voice broke through his thoughts. Do you want to weigh in on the next quarter's projections? Ethan blinked, clearing his throat. It looks solid, he said, feigning focus. Let's discuss execution strategies next week. The meeting adjourned, but Darren lingered. Everything okay, boss? You've seemed distracted lately. I'm fine, Ethan replied curtly, but the words felt hollow even to him. The air was cold, but Hannah Evans didn't shiver. She had learned long ago to accept the chill as part of her reality. Her park bench had become her refuge, an ironic sanctuary in the middle of the city's chaos. Around her, life moved at a frenetic pace, couples laughing as they walked by, workers clutching their coffee cups, and tourists snapping photos of the towering buildings. No one stopped to notice her, no one, except for the man from last night. Hannah couldn't figure him out. Most people who approached her did so with pity or condescension. They'd toss her $1 or some leftovers and disappear. But he had stayed, even after she brushed him off. Probably some bored rich guy, looking to ease his guilt, she muttered to herself. Still, a part of her wondered if he would actually return. That afternoon, Ethan found himself driving back to the park. This time, he came prepared. A brown paper bag filled with a sandwich and a thermos of hot soup, along with a thick wool blanket. Hannah noticed him before he even reached the bench. She sighed, bracing herself for another interaction. You're back, she said dryly as he approached. Didn't take the hint yesterday? Ethan smiled faintly, holding out the bag. I brought you lunch. Hannah eyed the bag suspiciously, but didn't take it. You always go around feeding strangers? Not really, he admitted, setting the bag on the bench beside her. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. Hannah narrowed her eyes. Why? You don't know me. I don't, Ethan said honestly. But I'd like to. Hannah let out a humorless laugh. You're persistent, I'll give you that. But I don't need your help, Mr. Charity Case. It's Ethan, he corrected. And it's not charity. Call it curiosity. Her gaze softened, if only slightly, but she still didn't reach for the bag. Curiosity's dangerous, you know. You might not like what you find. Maybe, Ethan replied, but I'm willing to take the risk. Over the next few days, Ethan made a habit of stopping by the park. Each time, he brought something small, a meal, a scarf, even a sketch pad and pencils, after noticing Hannah doodling on a scrap of paper. At first, she resisted, her pride clashing with his persistence. But gradually, she began to accept the small gestures, though not without a side of sarcasm. "Don't you have $1 billion empire to run?" she asked one afternoon, as he handed her a cup of coffee. Ethan chuckled. "You'd be surprised how much free time I have." "Must be nice," she muttered, sipping the coffee despite herself. Their conversations were brief, but revealing. Ethan learned that Hannah had once been an aspiring artist, with a knack for landscapes. She spoke of her work with a mix of pride and sorrow, hinting at a life that had unraveled. "You don't seem like the type to give up," Ethan said one day. "I didn't give up," she replied quietly. "Life gave up on me." Back in his world, Ethan found himself increasingly detached from the people and routines that once defined his life. The board meetings, lavish parties, and high-profile deals seemed hollow compared to the moments he spent with Hannah. He began questioning his own privilege and the emptiness of his accomplishments. For all his wealth and power, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed in some fundamental way. One evening, as he stood by his office window, staring out at the city lights, Darren approached him. "You've been different lately," Darren said. "Distracted? Is something going on?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "Have you ever felt like everything you've built doesn't matter?" Darren frowned. "Not really." "Why?" Ethan shook his head. "Never mind." Meanwhile, Hannah began to notice a change in herself. Though she still guarded her independence fiercely, she couldn't deny that Ethan's visits brought a sliver of warmth to her otherwise cold existence. One evening, as he handed her another sketch pad, she finally said, "Why are you doing this?" Ethan met her gaze, his expression earnest. "Because I want to, and because I think you deserve better." For the first time, Hannah didn't argue. She simply nodded, her fingers brushing against the sketch pad, as if it were something fragile and precious. As Ethan left the park that night, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. Hannah watched him go, her grip tightening on the sketch pad. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, small, fragile, but unmistakably real. The sun peeked through the skyscrapers, casting golden rays over the city, as Ethan Sinclair's morning began. His luxury penthouse was alive with the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. His assistant had already sent a list of meetings, yet his mind was elsewhere. Ethan found himself scrolling through sketches on his phone, drawings he had taken pictures of during his latest visit to Hannah at the park. She had hesitantly shown him her work a few days prior, sketches that revealed not just talent, but a depth of emotion that caught him off guard. Despite her circumstances, her art was vibrant, alive. He put down his phone, grabbed his jacket, and told himself it wasn't unusual to visit her again. But even he couldn't deny the pull he felt, the inexplicable need to understand her story further. Ethan parked his car a block away and walked to the same park bench where Hannah usually sat. Today, she wasn't alone. A scruffy-looking man with a shopping cart stood nearby, chatting animatedly with her. Hannah looked more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen her. The man, noticing Ethan's approach, grinned. "Well, well, if it isn't the fancy suit." Hannah smirked, her defenses slightly lowered. "Ethan, this is Jerry. Let's call him a neighborhood regular." Jerry extended a hand, dirt-streaked, but firm. "Pleasure to meet you. Heard you've been spending time with our girl here." Ethan hesitated, but shook his hand. Nice to meet you too, Jerry. Jerry gave Ethan a knowing look. You're not like most of them, are you? The ones who throw $1 and walk away. I hope not, Ethan replied, glancing at Hannah, who quickly averted her eyes. As Jerry wandered off, leaving them alone, Ethan took a seat on the bench. For once, Hannah didn't immediately bristle at his presence. Instead, she seemed contemplative, her gaze fixed on the bustling street ahead. Jerry's interesting, Ethan said, attempting to break the ice. Hannah chuckled softly. He's harmless. Been here longer than I have. Helps keep the creeps away. Does that happen often? Ethan asked, concern lacing his voice. Hannah shrugged. It's the city. You learn to watch your back. The conversation drifted to safer topics, and for the first time, Hannah shared more about herself. She spoke of her love for art, how she used to paint before her supplies became a luxury she couldn't afford. I used to have a tiny studio in Brooklyn, she admitted. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I could spend hours there, just losing myself in the colors. What happened? Ethan asked gently. Hannah hesitated before answering. Family drama. Trusting the wrong people. Everything fell apart faster than I could stop it. Her tone carried a weight that Ethan felt but didn't press. Instead, he said, You're talented, Hannah. You shouldn't stop creating. She glanced at him, skeptical. And how exactly am I supposed to do that, Ethan? Sketch with a stick in the dirt? Without a word, Ethan reached into his bag and pulled out a small set of watercolor paints and brushes. Hannah stared at it, her expression unreadable. You're relentless, you know that, she said, but there was no edge in her voice. I've been told, Ethan replied with a small smile. Their exchanges became more frequent, and with each visit, Hannah's walls began to crack. She started to share more about her struggles, while Ethan, in turn, revealed parts of his own life he rarely spoke about. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Ethan admitted, I wasn't always successful. Hannah raised an eyebrow. I find that hard to believe. It's true, he said, his voice softer now. I grew up in foster care, bounced between homes. By the time I was 18, I had nothing but a couple of bags and a lot of anger. Hannah studied him, her usual sarcasm replaced with curiosity. How'd you go from that to this? She asked, gesturing vaguely toward his tailored suit and expensive watch. Luck, Ethan admitted, and stubbornness. I got a scholarship, studied hard, and landed my first job at a startup. The rest, it just happened. For the first time, Hannah saw a different side of him, someone who understood what it meant to fight for survival. That evening, Ethan stayed longer than usual. They sat in comfortable silence as Hannah sketched a scene from the park. You know, she said, her voice quiet, I've spent so long being invisible. Most people don't even look at me, let alone talk to me. You're not invisible, Hannah, Ethan said firmly. Not to me. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them. Meanwhile, Ethan's growing attachment to Hannah didn't go unnoticed in his world. His assistant, Darren, began to grow curious about Ethan's frequent absences, while whispers started circulating among his colleagues. At a networking event, one of Ethan's business rivals, Mark Bennett, cornered him. So, Sinclair, Mark said with a sly grin, rumor has it you've taken a liking to unconventional company. Ethan stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. Mark chuckled. Oh, come on. Manhattan isn't that big. People talk. Ethan forced a smile. Let them talk. But Mark's words stayed with him, planting seeds of doubt that Ethan fought to ignore. As Ethan walked back to his car that evening, He couldn't help but replay the day's conversations. Hannah's laughter, her growing trust. It all felt significant, like the beginning of something he couldn't quite define. Back at the park, Hannah sat with the watercolor set that he had given her. She dipped a brush into the paint, hesitating for a moment, before making the first stroke on the blank paper. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. The crisp morning air bit harder than usual, as Hannah Evans woke up on the park bench. Despite the blanket Ethan had given her, the cold seemed to seep into her bones. Her stomach churned, an emptiness that had been gnawing at her for days. She pulled herself up, leaning against the back of the bench as the city began to come alive around her. The usual sights of joggers and dog walkers blurred into the background as a wave of dizziness overtook her. Ethan arrived at the park, later than usual, juggling calls from his assistant and pushbacks from his board members about an upcoming project. But the moment he saw Hannah, everything else faded. She was hunched over on the bench, pale and visibly unwell. He rushed to her side, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "Hannah, are you okay?" She tried to wave him off, her voice weak but defiant. "I'm fine. Just tired." "You don't look fine," Ethan said, his voice tinged with worry. "When was the last time you ate?" Hannah hesitated, her gaze shifting to avoid his. "Yesterday. Maybe." Ethan frowned, his concern deepening. Without waiting for her protest, he stood up. "Come on. We're going to get you checked out." "I don't need a doctor," she said firmly, though the effort to stand up betrayed her strength. Ethan's tone softened, but his resolve was unwavering. "Hannah, this isn't up for debate. You're coming with me." The sterile white walls of the hospital made Hannah feel exposed. She sat on the edge of the examination table, fidgeting with her hands, as Ethan spoke to the doctor outside. She hated this, being a charity case, someone who needed saving. The doctor returned with a clipboard, his expression calm but serious. "You're malnourished, which is likely causing the dizziness and fatigue," he said. "But there's more. Miss Evans, you're pregnant." The words hit her like a freight train. She froze, staring at the doctor, as if waiting for him to correct himself. Ethan, standing at the doorway, heard every word. His breath caught as he turned to look at her, his face a mixture of shock and concern. "Pregnant?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded. "About 8 weeks. Have you been receiving any prenatal care?" Hannah shook her head, still reeling. I didn't know." The car ride back from the hospital was quiet, the weight of the revelation settling heavily between them. Ethan glanced at Hannah occasionally, her face pale and unreadable. When they arrived back at the park, Ethan parked the car, but didn't make any moves to leave. "Hannah," he said gently, breaking the silence, "what do you want to do about this?" She didn't answer immediately, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can barely take care of myself. How am I supposed to take care of a baby?" "You're not alone in this," Ethan said firmly. "You don't have to do it on your own." Hannah scoffed lightly, though there was no humor in it. "What are you saying, Ethan? That you'll help me raise a kid that isn't even yours?" "If that's what it takes," Ethan replied without hesitation. His words stunned her into silence. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or obligation, but all she saw was sincerity. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to offer his support, but Hannah resisted. She couldn't shake the fear that accepting help would mean losing what little independence she had left. One evening, as they sat on the park bench, Ethan tried again. "You can't keep living like this, Hannah. It's not safe for you or the baby." "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice breaking. This is all I've got." "That's not true," Ethan countered. "You have me." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Why do you care so much? You don't even know me." Ethan hesitated before answering. "Because I see something in you, Hannah. You're stronger than you think, and I want to help you see that." Hannah's resolve wavered after another sleepless night and a particularly harsh encounter with a stranger who tried to take her few belongings. As she sat on the cold ground, clutching her blanket, she realized that Ethan might be right. She couldn't keep doing this. The next morning, when Ethan arrived at the park, she was waiting for him, her bag already packed. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I'll come with you, but only until I figure things out." Ethan smiled, a mixture of relief and determination. "That's all I'm asking." As they drove away from the park, Hannah looked out the window, the city rushing past her. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Ethan glanced at her, his hands steady on the wheel. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let her face it alone. In that moment, two very different worlds began to merge, setting the stage for a journey neither of them could have anticipated. The car slowed to a stop in front of Ethan Sinclair's penthouse building. The sleek, modern architecture towered over the bustling Manhattan street below, its mirrored windows reflecting the city's ceaseless activity. Hannah sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clutching her bag. The sheer luxury of the building felt like a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. Ethan noticed her hesitation. "It's just a place to rest, Hannah. Nothing more. You don't have to decide anything long-term right now." She nodded but said nothing, her eyes darting nervously to the doorman, who opened the car door. As they stepped into the marble-floored lobby, Hannah pulled her coat tighter around her, acutely aware of how out of place she felt. When the elevator doors opened to Ethan's penthouse, Hannah froze. The space was vast and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the New York City skyline in all its glory. "You live here?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "For now," Ethan replied, setting her bag down near the guest room. "It's quieter than the office. Gives me space to think." Hannah wandered hesitantly into the living room, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric of the sofa. The contrast to her life on the streets was staggering. Ethan broke the silence. "The guest room is yours. It has a private bathroom and plenty of space. Make yourself at home." "I don't even know what that means anymore," she muttered under her breath. That night, Hannah lay awake in the plush bed of the guest room. The sheets smelled fresh. The mattress cradled her aching body. But she couldn't sleep. Her mind churned with guilt. She hated feeling dependent, hated the idea that she might be seen as weak or a burden. The next morning she confronted Ethan. "I can't stay here. It's too much. I'm already taking advantage of your kindness." Ethan was pouring coffee when she spoke. He set down the pot and looked at her, his expression calm but firm. "You're not taking advantage of anything, Hannah," he said. "This isn't charity. It's a step forward." She crossed her arms, her defenses rising. "You don't get it. I don't want to be someone's project." "You're not a project," Ethan replied evenly. "You're a person who deserves a chance. That's all this is." Despite Ethan's best efforts to keep their arrangement private, word began to spread. A tabloid published a photo of Ethan and Hannah leaving the hospital together, accompanied by a sensational headline: "Tech Tycoon's Secret, a Homeless Mistress." The fallout was immediate. At the office, whispers followed Ethan through the halls, and Darren, his assistant, cautiously brought it up. Ethan, the board's concerned about the optics of this situation, Darren said during a meeting. Optics? Ethan repeated, his tone sharp. Darren hesitated. You know how the press spins these things. They're painting you as distracted, vulnerable. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Let them paint what they want. I'm not going to abandon someone just because it's inconvenient. The backlash extended beyond the office. Ethan's mother, Margaret Sinclair, made an unannounced visit to the penthouse. Margaret was the epitome of Manhattan elegance, dressed in a tailored suit and pearls that caught the light as she entered the living room. Her disapproving gaze swept over Hannah, who stood awkwardly by the window. Ethan, Margaret began, her tone icy. May I have a word? Ethan gestured toward the kitchen, and they stepped out of earshot. What is this? Margaret demanded, her voice low but sharp. A homeless woman living in your home? Do you understand how this looks? It's not about appearances, Mom, Ethan replied, his tone firm. It's about doing the right thing. Margaret's expression hardened. The right thing? You have a reputation to uphold. You've worked too hard to throw it away on this. Ethan clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. If my reputation can't withstand a little humanity, then it's not worth much, is it? Unbeknownst to them, Hannah had overheard the conversation. Her heart sank as she retreated to her room, feeling the weight of Margaret's disdain. Later that evening, Ethan knocked on her door. Can we talk? He asked softly. Hannah opened the door, but didn't meet his eyes. You should listen to her, Ethan. She's right. I don't belong here. You belong wherever you want to be, Ethan said. And if that's here, then that's where you'll stay. Hannah shook her head, tears threatening to spill. I don't want to ruin your life. You're not ruining anything, Ethan said firmly. You're giving me a chance to make mine mean something. The following days were a mix of tension and quiet moments of understanding. Ethan gave Hannah space, letting her adjust to her new surroundings. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, Hannah spoke up. I don't know how to thank you for all of this. You don't have to, Ethan said. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't give up on yourself, he said. Hannah nodded, her defenses softening for the first time. That night, Ethan returned home to find Hannah in the living room, a canvas propped up on the coffee table. She was painting, a vibrant, abstract piece that seemed to pulse with emotion. He watched her from the doorway, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, Hannah looked at peace, as if she had found a piece of herself she thought was lost. Looks like you're settling in, he said, stepping closer. Hannah glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. Maybe? In that moment, Ethan felt a spark of hope, not just for Hannah, but for both of them. The hum of morning traffic filled the air as Ethan's phone buzzed incessantly on his nightstand. He groggily reached for it, only to find a slew of notifications. Every major tabloid in the city seemed to have picked up the same story. Tech mogul Ethan Sinclair linked to homeless pregnant woman. Ethan scrolled through the articles, his jaw tightening. The photos showed him and Hannah leaving the hospital together, her hand clutching the edge of her coat tightly around her stomach. The captions were brutal. Millionaire's love project or scandal in the making. The man who has everything falls for someone who has nothing. His inbox was flooded with messages from colleagues, board members, and even old acquaintances he hadn't heard from in years. Some were supportive, but most were filled with concern, veiled as advice. Ethan's office, typically a sanctuary of calm efficiency, was a different scene that day. Darren greeted him with a strained expression. "Morning," Ethan said, already bracing himself. "We need to talk," Darren said, holding up a tablet displaying the latest headline. "The board is worried," Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Of course they are. They want to schedule an emergency meeting," Darren continued. "They're concerned about how this relationship with it is affecting your image, and by extension, the company's reputation." Ethan's voice turned icy. "My image or their bottom line?" "Both," Darren admitted, though his tone softened. "Look, I get it. You're trying to help her. But this isn't just about you anymore. It's about the company, the investors. And what about what's right?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising. "What about standing by someone who needs help, no matter what it costs?" Darren hesitated. "I'm on your side, Ethan. I just think you need to consider how far you're willing to go." Later that evening, Ethan returned to the penthouse, only to find his mother, Margaret Sinclair, waiting for him in the living room. She held a newspaper, her expression as sharp as the headline. "Ethan," she began, standing as he entered, "we need to talk." He sighed, setting his briefcase down. "If this is about the tabloids, it's about your life," she cut him off. "What are you doing? A homeless woman, pregnant no less? The entire city is talking about you like you've lost your mind." "I'm helping someone who needs it," Ethan replied, his tone calm but firm. Margaret's voice dropped, cold and measured. "You're jeopardizing everything you've built. Your company, your reputation, your future." Ethan crossed his arms. "If everything I've built can't withstand a little humanity, then maybe it's not worth as much as you think." Margaret's face hardened. "You sound just like your father." The words stung more than Ethan expected, but he didn't flinch. "Then maybe he was right, about more than you gave him credit for." Margaret's expression softened for a fleeting moment, before she composed herself. "I'm only trying to protect you." "And I'm trying to protect her," Ethan said. "If you can't understand that, maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Meanwhile, Hannah stayed in her room, scrolling through the headlines on her phone. The words were harsh, the comments cruel. When Ethan knocked on her door that evening, she hesitated before letting him in. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Hannah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're calling me a gold digger, a project, a mistake." "They don't know you," Ethan said firmly. "They don't know anything." Hannah looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Maybe they're right. Maybe you should have just left me on that bench." "Don't say that," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "You're stronger than this, stronger than all of them." She shook her head. "I don't want to ruin your life, Ethan." "You're not ruining anything," he said, taking her hand. "We're in this together, Hannah, no matter what." Ethan decided to take control of the narrative. He arranged a press conference at his office, despite objections from Darren and the board. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras trained on him, as he stepped up to the podium. "Good afternoon," Ethan began, his voice steady. "I want to address the rumors circulating about my personal life." He paused, letting the tension in the room build. "Yes, I am helping a woman named Hannah Evans. She's brave, resilient, and has faced challenges most of us couldn't imagine. And yes, she is pregnant." The murmurs grew louder, but Ethan raised a hand to silence them. What the tabloids fail to mention is that Hannah is more than the headlines make her out to be. She's an artist, a survivor, and someone who deserves a chance, not your judgment. One reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Sinclair, are you romantically involved with her?" Ethan met the reporter's gaze, unflinching. I'm involved in helping someone who deserves more than what life has given her. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. The press conference didn't silence everyone, but it shifted the narrative. Some articles began highlighting Ethan's compassion and questioning the media's harsh treatment of Hannah. Back at the penthouse, Hannah watched the conference replay on TV. When Ethan returned, she met him at the door. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. Yes, I did, he replied, because you deserve better. For the first time, Hannah felt the weight of his words sink in. That night, Ethan and Hannah sat on the penthouse balcony, the city lights twinkling below them. Do you regret it? Hannah asked. Ethan shook his head. Not for a second. She smiled faintly, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. Ethan looked at her, his resolve stronger than ever. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them together. It was a crisp afternoon, and the penthouse had settled into a rhythm of quiet tension. Ethan was out handling business meetings, while Hannah sat in the living room, surrounded by her sketches. She had begun painting again, using the supplies Ethan had bought her. The colors felt like a piece of herself she had lost, but was slowly reclaiming. The intercom buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. Expecting it to be Ethan, she answered, Yes? A voice crackled through. Hannah Evans? It's me. Daniel. Her heart sank. The last person she expected or wanted to see stood at the door. Daniel Evans, her estranged brother, stepped into the penthouse. He looked just as she remembered, polished but hollow, his expensive suit and confident smile masking the opportunist beneath. Nice place, he said, glancing around before meeting her wary gaze. You've done well for yourself. This isn't mine, Hannah said curtly. What do you want, Daniel? He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I heard about your situation. Thought I'd check in. She folded her arms, her voice cold. Since when do you care? Daniel sighed, his mask of charm faltering for a moment. Look, I know I wasn't there for you before, but things were complicated back then. Complicated? She repeated, her tone sharp. You mean when you sold out Dad's business and left me to deal with the fallout? Daniel winced but quickly recovered. I made mistakes, okay? I'm trying to make amends now. When Ethan walked in, he immediately sensed the tension. Daniel turned to greet him, extending a hand. You must be Ethan. I'm Daniel, Hannah's brother. Ethan shook his hand, his smile polite, but his eyes cautious. Nice to meet you. Hannah stepped in quickly. Daniel was just leaving. Daniel smirked. We'll catch up later, sis. You have my number. As soon as the door closed behind him, Hannah sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. Are you okay? Ethan asked, sitting beside her. She shook her head. He's not here to reconnect. He wants something. He always does. That evening, over dinner, Hannah opened up about her past. She spoke of her father's small but successful furniture business and how Daniel, eager for fast money, had sold it to a predatory buyer. The family lost everything, and the betrayal shattered their lives. After that, I tried to rebuild, Hannah said, her voice trembling. But I didn't know how to do it alone. And Daniel? He disappeared, like it didn't matter. Ethan listened intently, his expression a mix of anger and empathy. And now, he's back, because he sees you have something again. Hannah nodded. But I'm not falling for it this time. Over the next few days, Daniel's presence lingered like a shadow. He sent texts, left voicemails, and even showed up uninvited at the penthouse when Ethan wasn't home. One afternoon, Hannah finally confronted him, outside a nearby cafe. What did you want, Daniel? she demanded, her voice low but fierce. He sighed, dropping the pretense of concern. Fine. You're right. I need help. I've got debts. Big ones. I thought maybe, with Ethan's connections, you could... No. She cut him off, her eyes blazing. I'm not helping you. Not after what you did. You're really going to turn your back on family? He asked, his voice laced with mock guilt. You turned your back first, she shot back. We're done, Daniel. When Ethan found out about the confrontation, his protective instincts kicked in. I'll handle him, he said firmly. Hannah shook her head. He's my problem, Ethan. I'll deal with it. You don't have to do this alone, he said. Not anymore. That evening, Ethan called his legal team, instructing them to gather information on Daniel. Despite her efforts to keep Daniel at bay, he managed to slip through her defenses. One evening, while Ethan was at a charity gala, Daniel appeared at the penthouse. I just need a little to get back on my feet, he pleaded, his tone desperate. Against her better judgment, Hannah gave him a small sum, hoping it would make him leave for good. But the next morning, she discovered he had stolen more, money Ethan had set aside for her prenatal care. The betrayal shattered Hannah. She spent hours in her room, her mind replaying the moment she had trusted Daniel one last time. When Ethan returned home and saw the state she was in, he didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside her, waiting for her to speak. I trusted him, she said finally, her voice barely audible. And he betrayed me. Again. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. This isn't your fault, Hannah. He took advantage of your kindness. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I feel so stupid. You're not stupid, Ethan said gently. You're human, and you deserve better than this. That night, Ethan filed a police report against Daniel, ensuring he couldn't harm Hannah again. As they sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below, Ethan said, We'll get through this. Together. Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder, her walls crumbling just a little more. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to trust again. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the penthouse windows, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Hannah sat at the kitchen island, staring at a cold cup of coffee. Ethan leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable as he scrolled through his phone. The betrayal had left a raw wound. Daniel's theft wasn't just about the money. It reopened old scars Hannah had tried so hard to bury. Ethan finally broke the silence. The legal team is on it. We'll make sure he doesn't come near you again. Hannah nodded but didn't look up. It's not just about him, Ethan. It's about me. I let him in. You're not responsible for what he did, Ethan said, his voice steady. But I am, she countered, her voice breaking. I gave him the chance. I let myself believe he'd changed. Ethan crossed the room, pulling out a chair beside her. Hannah, you trusted him because you wanted to believe in something good. That's not a weakness. That's strength. She looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. It doesn't feel like strength. Daniel's betrayal rippled through their lives in ways neither of them expected. The tabloids, always hungry for scandal, picked up the story. The headlines screamed, Brother betrays tech tycoon's mysterious woman. Scandal in the Sinclair penthouse. Family drama unfolds. The public scrutiny became unbearable. Hannah avoided leaving the penthouse, retreating further into herself. Ethan, on the other hand, was forced to field questions from board members, friends, and even acquaintances who relished in his misfortune. One evening, after a particularly grueling board meeting, Ethan returned home to find Hannah in the living room, her sketchbook untouched beside her. This isn't working, she said quietly, not meeting his gaze. What do you mean? Ethan asked, sitting down across from her. This, me being here? It's not fair to you, to your life. Ethan frowned. Hannah, you're not a burden. I am, she insisted, her voice rising. Look at what's happened since I came into your life. The headlines, the board, Daniel. You've lost so much because of me. You're wrong, Ethan said firmly. The only thing I'd lose is you. And that's not something I'm willing to let happen. Despite Ethan's reassurances, the weight of guilt became too much for Hannah to bear. That night, while Ethan worked late in his home office, she packed a small bag. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Ethan, you've given me more than I ever deserved, and I'll always be grateful. But I can't keep being the reason your life falls apart. You deserve peace, and I can't give that to you. Don't look for me, Hannah. When Ethan found the note, his heart sank. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed his coat and car keys, determined to find her. Ethan drove through the city, checking every place he thought Hannah might go. The park where they first met, the hospital, even a few homeless shelters he had researched in case she needed help. But she was nowhere to be found. By the time the sun rose, Ethan was exhausted but no less determined. He returned home, his mind racing with possibilities. Meanwhile, Hannah wandered the city, her small bag slung over her shoulder. She avoided the places Ethan might look, finding temporary refuge in a crowded cafe. She sat in a corner, staring out the window as the city moved around her. A part of her wanted to call him, to tell him she was okay. But another part, the part consumed by guilt and fear, kept her phone in her pocket. As the days passed, she fell back into old habits, finding herself on the edge of survival once again. The safety and warmth of Ethan's penthouse felt like a distant memory. Back at the penthouse, Ethan's frustration boiled over. He contacted private investigators, filed a missing persons report, and called anyone who might have seen her. Darren, his assistant, found him pacing the office one evening. You're not going to stop, are you? Would you? Ethan shot back, his voice filled with emotion. Darren hesitated. I wouldn't. A week later, Ethan received a call from a hospital. Hannah had been brought in, after collapsing on the street. When Ethan arrived, he found her pale and weak, lying in a hospital bed. Her eyes fluttered open as he entered the room. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. Neither should you, Ethan replied, his voice breaking. What were you thinking, Hannah? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was thinking you'd be better off without me. He sat beside her, taking her hand. Don't ever say that again. My life is better because of you, not in spite of you. As Hannah recovered, Ethan stayed by her side, refusing to leave even when she insisted he didn't have to. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her hospital window, Ethan made a quiet promise. We're going to get through this, he said, his voice steady. Together. No more running. No more fear. Hannah looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope. What if I mess everything up again? Then we'll fix it, Ethan said simply, because that's what people do when they care about each other. For the first time in days, Hannah smiled. It was small and hesitant, but it was a start. The city buzzed with controversy surrounding Ethan Sinclair's relationship with Hannah Evans. The story had transcended tabloid gossip, becoming a polarizing topic across social media, morning talk shows, and even corporate boardrooms. Some praised Ethan for his compassion, calling him a rare example of humanity among the elite. Others accused him of recklessness, claiming he was jeopardizing his empire for a scandalous relationship. Ethan sat in his office, scrolling through the headlines. He stopped at a particularly venomous article. Tech tycoon risks billion-dollar legacy for a homeless love affair. The words stung, but they didn't deter him. Instead, they fueled his resolve. Ethan called Darren into his office. "Schedule a press conference," he said, his voice steady. Darren blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "A press conference? Are you sure?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's time I addressed this head on." Darren hesitated. "You know they'll tear you apart, right? The media's not going to hold back." Ethan's gaze was unwavering. "Let them. This isn't about me. It's about Hannah." As the day of the press conference approached, Ethan worked closely with his PR team. They advised caution, suggesting he focus on his philanthropic efforts to soften the narrative. Ethan dismissed the idea. "This isn't about spinning the story. It's about telling the truth." Meanwhile, Hannah watched from the sidelines, torn between gratitude and fear. She worried Ethan was sacrificing too much for her, but every time she voiced her concerns, he met her with the same unwavering determination. "You're worth it," he told her, his voice firm yet gentle. The room was packed with reporters, their cameras flashing as Ethan stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone, his expression calm but resolute. "Good afternoon," he began. "I've called this press conference to address the rumors and speculation surrounding my personal life." He paused, allowing the room to settle. "Yes, I am in a relationship with Hannah Evans. Yes, she was homeless when I met her. And yes, she is pregnant. But let me make one thing clear. None of that defines who she is." The murmurs in the room grew louder, but Ethan raised his hand, silencing them. "Hannah is one of the most resilient and compassionate people I've ever met. She has faced challenges most of us can't imagine, and she's done it with a strength that inspires me every day." A reporter stood up. "Mr. Sinclair, how do you respond to claims that this relationship is damaging your company's reputation?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Reputation means nothing if it's built on ignoring what's right. If standing by someone I care about damages my image, then so be it." Another reporter chimed in. "Are you prepared to lose investors over this?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, because the investors I want are the ones who value integrity as much as profits." The press conference sent shockwaves through the city. While some continued to criticize Ethan, many were moved by his courage. Social media lit up with messages of support, and even a few corporate leaders publicly praised his stance. Hannah watched the coverage from the penthouse, her eyes welling with tears. When Ethan returned that evening, she greeted him with a tight hug. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just promise me you won't give up on yourself." Ethan's bold stand didn't sit well with everyone. At the next board meeting, tensions reached a boiling point. Ricardo, one of the senior board members, leaned back in his chair, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Ethan, you've always been a visionary. But this is reckless." Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "Reckless is ignoring what matters to chase public approval." "You're putting the company at risk," Ricardo argued. "Investors are nervous. Stocks are fluctuating. This isn't just about you anymore." Ethan stood, his voice firm but controlled. "The company will survive because it's built on innovation and values, not on gossip columns. If anyone here can't see that, feel free to step down." The room fell silent. Ethan scanned the faces around the table, daring anyone to challenge him. Despite the backlash, Ethan began receiving unexpected support. Longtime business partners reached out privately, commending his courage. One even offered to host a charity gala to spotlight his philanthropic efforts, turning the narrative in his favor. Hannah, still grappling with her own insecurities, attended the gala reluctantly. Ethan assured her, "You belong here as much as anyone else." As they entered the grand ballroom, whispers rippled through the crowd. But when Ethan introduced Hannah as his partner, the whispers turned into applause. The gala marked a turning point for Hannah. Seeing the respect Ethan commanded and the support they were beginning to garner gave her a newfound confidence. "I want to do more," she told Ethan later that night. "Not just for myself, but for others like me." Ethan smiled, his pride evident. "Then, let's make it happen." The morning sunlight bathed the penthouse in a golden hue. Ethan and Hannah sat at the breakfast table, sipping coffee in a rare moment of peace. "You seem calmer today," Ethan remarked, his tone light. Hannah nodded. "I think I'm starting to believe we can get through this." Their tranquility was interrupted by the buzz of Ethan's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. "It's from my legal team," he said, answering the call. "What's going on?" As he listened, his brows furrowed and his gaze flicked to Hannah. "Wait, what? Are you sure?" He ended the call and set his phone down, his eyes fixed on her. "What is it?" Hannah asked, suddenly uneasy. "You need to hear this," Ethan said, his tone serious. "It's about your family." Ethan explained that his legal team had been investigating Daniel's financial activities to ensure he couldn't exploit Hannah further. In the process, they uncovered something unexpected, a trail of documents proving that Hannah's father's company had been fraudulently taken from him. "What does this mean?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. "It means the sale was illegal," Ethan said, "and you're the rightful heir to your father's estate." Hannah stared at him, struggling to process the information. "How is that possible? My family lost everything." "The buyer and Daniel orchestrated the deal," Ethan explained. "But they didn't cover their tracks as well as they thought. With this evidence, you can reclaim everything that was taken from you." The news left Hannah reeling. Part of her wanted to fight for what her family had lost, but another part was terrified of reopening old wounds. "What if I don't deserve it?" she asked Ethan later that evening. Ethan sat beside her, his gaze steady. "This isn't about deserving, Hannah. It's about justice. Your father built that company. It's yours by right." "But it won't change anything," she said, her voice breaking. "It won't bring him back. It won't undo what Daniel did." "No," Ethan admitted, "but it could give you a fresh start, a chance to honor your father's legacy." Ethan arranged a meeting with Daniel and the fraudulent buyer, Gregory Mason, at a neutral location. Hannah insisted on coming, determined to face them herself. The tension was palpable as they entered the sleek corporate conference room. Gregory sat at the head of the table, his polished demeanor masking a simmering irritation. Daniel was fidgety, his confidence eroding under Ethan's glare. Hannah took a deep breath before speaking. "You stole from my family. You destroyed everything my father built." Gregory smirked. "The deal was legal." "No, it wasn't," Ethan interjected, sliding a folder across the table. "This proves otherwise. And if you don't return what's rightfully hers, we'll take this to court and to the press." Daniel paled, while Gregory's smirk faded. "You can't win this," Gregory said, his tone defensive. Ethan leaned forward, his voice cold. "Try me." After hours of tense negotiation, Gregory and Daniel relented. They agreed to return the stolen assets, fearing the public and legal fallout. If they didn't. When the meeting ended, Hannah stood outside the building, her emotions swirling. "You did it," Ethan said, his voice filled with pride. "We did it," she corrected, a small smile breaking through her exhaustion. Reclaiming her family's estate brought an unexpected sense of empowerment. Hannah decided to use the assets to honor her father's memory by turning his old company headquarters into a community center for struggling families. It's what he would have wanted, she told Ethan as they toured the building. Ethan smiled, watching her take charge. I think he'd be proud. The story of Hannah's legal victory made headlines, but this time, the narrative was different. Articles praised her resilience and determination, painting her as a symbol of hope and redemption. Ethan's decision to stand by her was also lauded, with some commentators calling it a rare example of integrity in a cutthroat industry. One evening, Hannah sat at her desk, writing a letter she knew would never be read. Dear Dad, I hope I've made you proud. I wish you were here to see it, to see that we've taken back what's ours. I promise I'll use it to help others, just like you always did. Tears blurred her vision as she folded the letter and placed it in a small box on her nightstand. Ethan and Hannah stood on the rooftop of her newly reclaimed building, the city skyline stretching before them. What's next? Ethan asked, wrapping an arm around her. Hannah looked out at the horizon, a newfound determination in her eyes. We build something better, together. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride and love. I wouldn't want it any other way. As they stood there, the weight of the past began to lift, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. The grand opening of the Evans Community Center was a day filled with emotion and pride. The building, once the heart of her father's business, now stood as a beacon of hope for struggling families and individuals seeking a second chance. Hannah stood in front of a small crowd, microphone in hand, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. This building was my father's dream, she began, her gaze sweeping over the attendees. And now, it's a place where others can find their own dreams again. Ethan stood in the crowd, his heart swelling with pride as he watched her. The shy, guarded woman he had met on that park bench was now a leader, inspiring others with her resilience. The community center quickly became a hub of activity. It offered job training programs, art therapy sessions, and a safe space for families in need. Hannah poured her energy into every detail, from hiring compassionate staff to designing creative spaces where children could thrive. Ethan supported her every step of the way, providing resources and using his connections to secure funding and partnerships. One afternoon, as they walked through the center together, Hannah pointed out a mural being painted by local artists. This is what I want, she said, her voice filled with conviction. To give people a place to feel seen, to feel valued. Ethan smiled. And you're doing it. You're changing lives. Despite the progress, Hannah faced challenges that tested her newfound confidence. During a staff meeting, a disagreement arose about how to allocate resources. Some believed the focus should be on emergency housing, while others prioritized long-term skill-building programs. Hannah listened intently before speaking. Both are important, she said. But we have to start with what we can sustain. Let's find a balance and ensure no one is left behind. Her ability to mediate and find solutions earned the respect of her team, but the weight of responsibility often kept her awake at night. At home, Ethan noticed the toll the center's demands were taking on Hannah. One evening, he found her in the kitchen, staring at a stack of paperwork. Hey, he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this alone. Hannah sighed, leaning into his touch. It's just so much. I want to do everything, but it feels impossible. You're already doing more than most people ever would, Ethan said, and you have a whole team to help you. Let them. She nodded, a small smile forming. You always know what to say. The center's first major success came when a young single mother, Emily, found stable employment through their job training program. At a celebration event, Emily stood up to share her story. "Before I came here, I thought my life was over," she said, her voice trembling. "But this place gave me hope, and it gave my son a future." Hannah wiped away tears as the crowd erupted in applause. Later that evening, she turned to Ethan. "This is what it's all about. This makes everything worth it." Hannah's journey of healing wasn't confined to her work at the center. She began attending therapy, encouraged by Ethan, to confront the lingering pain of her past. During one session, her therapist asked, "What do you think your father would say if he saw you now?" Hannah paused, her eyes welling with tears. "I think he'd be proud, and maybe he'd tell me it's okay to let go of the guilt." Hannah and Ethan's relationship deepened as they navigated their individual and shared challenges. They made time for each other amidst their busy schedules, often spending quiet evenings on the rooftop, reflecting on how far they'd come. One night, as they watched the city lights twinkle below, Ethan took her hand. "I never imagined my life could feel this full," he said. "And it's because of you." Hannah smiled, squeezing his hand. "You've given me so much, Ethan, more than I ever thought I deserved." "You deserve everything," he said, his voice filled with conviction. Inspired by the success of the community center, Ethan suggested they expand their efforts. "What if we started a foundation?" he proposed one evening. "Something that combines our strengths, your vision, and my resources." Hannah's eyes lit up. "A foundation? What would we call it?" He grinned. "How about the Sinclair Evans Foundation?" Hannah laughed, the sound filled with genuine joy. "I like the sound of that." The Evans Community Center was alive with energy as people gathered for the grand opening of Hannah's art exhibit, a project she had poured her heart and soul into. The gallery walls were adorned with stunning pieces created by homeless artists, each one telling a story of resilience and hope. Hannah stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress that Ethan had surprised her with earlier in the week. "You look incredible," Ethan whispered as he approached, handing her a glass of sparkling water. She smiled nervously. "I just hope people connect with the art." "They will," Ethan said with certainty, "because it's real, just like you." As the evening progressed, the gallery buzzed with admiration. Guests marveled at the artwork, and several pieces were sold within the first hour. One elderly woman paused in front of a painting that depicted a pair of hands holding a wilted flower, titled "Hope Reborn." "Who painted this?" she asked. Hannah stepped forward. "A young woman named Mia. She was one of our first residents at the center. This piece represents her journey." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "It's beautiful. I'll take it." Hannah thanked her, her heart swelling with pride. Unbeknownst to Hannah, Ethan had been meticulously planning the night's main event. With the help of Darren and a few close friends, he had orchestrated a surprise proposal that would leave her speechless. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan took the stage. The room quieted as he tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "This exhibit is more than just art. It's a testament to resilience, to transformation, and to the power of hope." He glanced at Hannah, his gaze softening. "And no one embodies those qualities more than the woman who made all of this possible." Ethan stepped off the stage and walked toward Hannah, who looked both surprised and nervous. He took her hand and led her to the center of the room. "Hannah," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I met you, my life was all about numbers and deals. I thought I had everything I needed. but you showed me what it means to truly live." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The crowd gasped as he dropped to one knee. "Hannah Evans, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Hannah's face as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you." The room erupted in applause as Ethan slid the ring onto her finger. He stood and pulled her into a tight embrace, the world around them fading as they held each other. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations and toasts. Guests clinked glasses, and Hannah couldn't stop staring at the ring on her finger. A simple yet elegant design that perfectly captured her personality. Later, as they walked home under the city lights, Hannah turned to Ethan. "I can't believe you planned all of that." He chuckled. "I wanted it to be perfect, just like you." She smiled, her heart full. "It was perfect. But you didn't have to do all of this to prove anything to me." "I know," Ethan said, stopping to look at her. "I just wanted you to know how much you mean to me." Over the next few weeks, the engagement became a source of joy and excitement. Friends and supporters from the community center showered them with well wishes, and even the media began to shift their tone, focusing on the couple's impact rather than their differences. Ethan's mother, who had initially been skeptical of their relationship, called to congratulate them. "You've found someone who makes you happy," she said. "That's all a mother could want." The comment left Ethan surprised but touched. He knew it was a step toward acceptance. Despite the excitement, Hannah insisted on a simple wedding. "I don't want anything extravagant," she told Ethan as they flipped through a wedding planning book. "I don't need extravagant," Ethan replied. "I just need you." They decided on an intimate ceremony at the community center, a place that had come to symbolize their journey together. As the wedding date approached, Hannah and Ethan worked together to balance their growing responsibilities. The Sinclair Evans Foundation had taken off, with new projects in the pipeline. One evening, while finalizing plans for a housing complex, Hannah paused and looked at Ethan. "Do you ever feel like this is all too much?" He reached for her hand. "Sometimes. But then I remember why we're doing it. For us. For the people we're helping. And for the life we're building together." She smiled, feeling the weight of her doubts lift. "I couldn't do this without you." "You'll never have to," he said, kissing her forehead. The wedding date was set. The Sinclair Evans Foundation building, where countless lives had begun to transform, would serve as the backdrop for their intimate ceremony. Hannah and Ethan decided it was the perfect place to celebrate their union, a space that represented hope, resilience, and new beginnings. Hannah sat in the foundation's conference room, surrounded by fabric swatches and floral arrangements. Her close friend and event planner, Lily, was busily scribbling notes. "This is more elegant than I imagined," Hannah said, tracing her fingers over a sketch of the ceremony layout. "Elegant doesn't have to mean extravagant," Lily said with a wink. "It's your day. It should feel like you." Ethan poked his head into the room. "How's it going in here?" "Fine. As long as you're staying out of trouble," Hannah teased. He grinned. "Always." Between wedding planning and their expanding responsibilities at the foundation, life was a whirlwind. Ethan juggled meetings with investors, while Hannah worked on a new mentorship program for women at the community center. One evening, they sat at the dining table, reviewing paperwork for the housing complex project. "Do you ever feel like we're taking on too much?" Hannah asked, setting down her pen. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But then I look at everything we've accomplished, and I know it's worth it." She smiled. "I don't know how you stay so calm." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Because I have you." As the wedding approached, Ethan's mother, Evelyn Sinclair, began to show a softer side. Once a staunch critic of their relationship, she now seemed genuinely invested in their happiness. Evelyn arrived at the penthouse one afternoon, with a small box in hand. "I thought this might be of use," she said, handing it to Hannah. Hannah opened it to reveal a delicate lace handkerchief embroidered with the Sinclair family crest. "It belonged to my grandmother," Evelyn said. "She carried it on her wedding day, and I thought it might bring you luck." Hannah was taken aback by the gesture. "Thank you," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. Evelyn smiled. "I've seen how happy you make Ethan. That's all I could ever want for my son." Hannah's friends gathered at a small boutique for her final dress fitting. The gown was a simple yet stunning creation, with delicate lace details and a flowing train. As she stepped onto the pedestal, the room fell silent. "You look beautiful," Lily whispered, her eyes glistening. Hannah turned to see herself in the mirror, hardly recognizing the confident woman staring back. "Do you think he'll like it?" she asked nervously. "He's going to be speechless," Lily said with a grin. While Hannah was busy with wedding details, Ethan faced his own insecurities. One evening, he confided in Darren over drinks at a quiet rooftop bar. "Do you ever think I'm not enough for her?" Ethan asked, swirling his glass. Darren raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? Ethan, you've done more for her and with her than most people do in a lifetime. It's just, she's incredible. And sometimes I wonder if I'm holding her back." Darren leaned forward, his tone firm. "You're not, thus, holding her back. You're giving her the space to shine. And she's doing the same for you." Ethan nodded, his friend's words easing the weight on his shoulders. On the night before the wedding, Ethan presented Hannah with a surprise. He led her to a private room now in the foundation's building, where a portrait hung on the wall. It depicted Hannah standing in front of the community center, surrounded by children and families she had helped. "This is incredible," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It's to remind you of everything you've accomplished," Ethan said, "and to show you how proud I am to be by your side." Hannah embraced him tightly, her heart full. The rehearsal dinner was an intimate affair, held in the community center's courtyard, under strings of twinkling lights. Friends, family, and foundation staff gathered to toast the couple. Evelyn stood to give a speech, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "When I first met Hannah, I wasn't sure what to think," she admitted. "But I've come to see her strength, her compassion, and her unwavering love for my son. Ethan, you've found someone extraordinary. And Hannah, welcome to the family." The room erupted in applause as Hannah blinked back tears. After the dinner, Ethan and Hannah stole a moment alone on the rooftop of the community center. "Are you nervous?" Ethan asked, his arm around her. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm excited." He kissed her forehead. "Tomorrow everything changes. Are you ready for that?" "With you? Always," she said, smiling up at him. As they stood under the stars, the weight of their journey felt lighter. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one they were ready to face together. The morning sunlight poured through the windows of the Sinclair Evans Foundation's main hall, transformed overnight into a dreamy wedding venue. Soft white flowers adorned the aisles, fairy lights twinkled above, and every detail reflected the simplicity and elegance Hannah had envisioned. In a quiet room upstairs, Hannah stood in front of a full-length mirror as Lily helped adjust the final details of her gown. The delicate lace glimmered faintly in the sunlight, and her veil cascaded down her back like a gentle waterfall. "You look breathtaking," Lily said, stepping back to admire her friend. Hannah smiled nervously, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her veil. I want everything to go perfectly. Lily squeezed her shoulder. It already is. Trust me, Ethan's going to lose it when he sees you. In another room, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, his expression a mix of excitement and nerves. Darren stood nearby, trying to lighten the mood. Relax, Darren said with a grin. You've faced boardrooms full of billionaires. This should be a walk in the park. Ethan chuckled. It's different. This isn't about business. It's about everything. You're ready, Darren said firmly. And so is she. Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. Yeah, I am. As the ceremony drew closer, guests began to fill the seats. Friends from the community center mingled with Ethan's business associates, a testament to how their worlds had merged. Evelyn Sinclair greeted attendees with surprising warmth, a clear sign of her newfound acceptance of Hannah. This is beautiful, she said to Lily, who had taken charge of coordinating the event. Hannah deserves nothing less. The music shifted, signaling the start of the ceremony. Ethan stood at the altar, his heart pounding, as he watched the doors open. Hannah appeared, her arm linked with Darren's, a decision she'd made to honor the friend who had supported her and Ethan through so much. As she walked down the aisle, Ethan felt his breath catch. She looked radiant, her eyes shimmering with emotion as they locked onto his. Hannah's own nerves melted away when she saw Ethan's expression, pure love and admiration. The officiant began with a warm welcome before inviting Ethan and Hannah to exchange their vows. Ethan took her hands, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Hannah, from the moment I met you, my life changed. You showed me what it means to truly care, to fight for something real. I promise to stand by your side, to support you, and to love you every day for the rest of our lives. Tears glistened in Hannah's eyes as she spoke her vows. Ethan, you found me when I thought I was lost. You saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. Because of you, I believe in love, in hope, and in the future. I promise to love you, to trust you, and to build a life with you filled with purpose and joy. As the officiant declared them husband and wife, Ethan leaned in to kiss Hannah, sealing their vows. The guests erupted into applause, some dabbing away tears. Among the clapping and cheers, little Laura, a toddler from the community center who had grown attached to Hannah, giggled loudly, drawing laughter from the crowd. The reception was held in the community center's courtyard, now transformed into a magical space, with hanging lanterns and long tables adorned with greenery and candles. Ethan and Hannah shared their first dance to a soft acoustic rendition of At Last. As they swayed under the twinkling lights, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Darren delivered a humorous yet touching speech. When Ethan first told me about Hannah, I thought he was crazy, a tech mogul and a homeless artist. But then I met her, and I realized something. She's the only one who could keep him grounded. The crowd laughed, and Darren raised his glass. To Ethan and Hannah, two people who prove that love can truly change everything. Evelyn's speech followed, surprising everyone with its sincerity. Hannah, I wasn't sure what to think when you first came into Ethan's life. But now, I see what he saw all along. Strength, compassion, and love. You've brought out the best in him, and for that, I'll always be grateful. Welcome to the family. Toward the end of the evening, Ethan led Hannah to a secluded area of the courtyard where a small stage had been set up. What's this? She asked, her curiosity piqued. Ethan smiled. A little surprise. The lights dimmed as a projector lit up, displaying a montage of photos and videos. It chronicled Hannah's journey, from her days on the streets to her transformation as a leader and advocate. The final frame read, Hannah Sinclair, a woman who inspires us all. Hannah turned to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. You didn't have to do this. I wanted everyone to see the woman I fell in love with, he said softly. As the guests began to leave, Ethan and Hannah stood together, looking out over the courtyard. Today was perfect, Hannah said, leaning into Ethan's embrace. It was, he agreed. But it's just the beginning. They gazed up at the stars, the promise of their future shining as brightly as the night sky. Months after their wedding, Ethan and Hannah stood in the nursery they had lovingly prepared for their first child. The soft pastel colors, hand-painted animal murals, and the crib Ethan had assembled himself filled the room with warmth and anticipation. Hannah rested a hand on her growing belly, her expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. Do you think we're ready for this? She asked, turning to Ethan. He smiled, wrapping an arm around her. We've faced everything else together. This is just the next adventure. As Hannah's due date approached, the couple's lives became a whirlwind of baby classes, doctor appointments, and last-minute preparations. Ethan, ever the planner, meticulously checked every detail. Do we have enough diapers? What about bottles? And the car seat? Hannah laughed, placing a hand on his arm. Ethan, we've got it covered. Take a breath. He exhaled, smiling sheepishly. I just want everything to be perfect. The staff at the Sinclair Evans Foundation threw a surprise baby shower for Hannah, filling the community center's main hall with balloons, streamers, and laughter. Evelyn Sinclair even made an appearance, bringing a beautifully wrapped gift, a family heirloom silver rattle. This belonged to Ethan when he was a baby, Evelyn said, her voice soft. I thought it was time to pass it on. Hannah was touched by the gesture. Thank you, Evelyn. It means so much to us. In the middle of a quiet evening at home, Hannah felt the first sharp pangs of labor. It's happening, she said, gripping Ethan's hand. Ethan's eyes widened, and he quickly sprang into action. Grabbing the hospital bag they'd prepared weeks ago, he helped Hannah to the car and drove with surprising calmness. At the hospital, the medical team moved swiftly, guiding Hannah to a delivery room. You've got this, Ethan whispered, holding her hand tightly. The hours of labor were intense, but Hannah's determination shone through. Ethan stayed by her side, offering words of encouragement and wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. Finally, the room filled with the sound of their baby's first cries. It's a boy, the doctor announced, placing the tiny squirming bundle in Hannah's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she looked at their son for the first time. He's perfect, she whispered. Ethan leaned over, his voice thick with emotion. You're amazing, Hannah. Both of you. Bringing their son, James Sinclair, home was a moment of pure joy and nervousness. The first few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, late-night feedings, and endless diaper changes. One night, as Ethan rocked James to sleep in the nursery, he whispered, You have no idea how much you're loved, little guy. Hannah stood in the doorway watching with a smile. You're a natural, she said softly. He chuckled. You think so? Because I feel like I'm making it up as I go. We both are, Hannah replied, stepping closer. But we're doing it together. As the weeks turned into months, the Sinclair family found their rhythm. Hannah balanced her responsibilities at the community center with her new role as a mother, often bringing James with her to work. He's already making an impact, one staff member joked, as James cooed from his stroller during a meeting. Ethan, meanwhile, adjusted his work schedule to spend more time at home. One evening, he surprised Hannah with a homemade dinner. Just because we're parents doesn't mean we can't have date nights, he said with a wink. Hannah received an unexpected letter one afternoon from her estranged brother, Daniel. I heard about the baby. The letter read, I'd like to meet him. Maybe it's time we start over. Hannah was conflicted. She shared the letter with Ethan, who supported her decision to address it on her terms. If you're ready, I'll be right there with you, he said. Hannah agreed to meet Daniel at a local cafe. Ethan accompanied her for support, but gave them space to talk. I didn't expect you to reply, Daniel said, his tone hesitant. I didn't know if I should, Hannah admitted, but I thought James deserves to know his uncle. If you're ready to be a part of his life. Daniel nodded, his expression sincere. I am. I've made mistakes, Hannah, but I want to make things right. Over time, Daniel's presence became a quiet but positive addition to their lives. He volunteered at the community center, eager to prove his sincerity. One day, as he held James during a family gathering, Ethan leaned over to Hannah. Maybe people really can change, he said with a smile. Hannah nodded, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Maybe they can. One quiet evening, Ethan and Hannah sat on the couch. James nestled between them. This, Ethan said, looking around the room, is everything I've ever wanted. Hannah rested her head on his shoulder, a content smile on her face. Me too. As they watched James drift off to sleep, the weight of their journey felt distant. All that remained was the warmth of their love and the promise of the future they were building together. The Sinclair Evans Foundation had grown far beyond what Ethan and Hannah had ever imagined. 5 years after its inception, it now included multiple community centers, housing complexes, and programs supporting homeless families, artists, and single parents. On a crisp autumn morning, Ethan and Hannah stood on the balcony of their home, overlooking the city skyline. Their son, James, now 4 years old, played with his toys nearby. We've come so far, Hannah said, her voice tinged with wonder. Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist. And we're just getting started. Hannah was spearheading a new initiative, a nationwide program to replicate their community center model in underserved areas. During a meeting with the foundation's board, she presented her vision with the same passion that had driven her from the start. This isn't just about providing shelter, she said. It's about creating spaces where people can rebuild their lives, rediscover their talents, and find hope again. The room erupted in applause as Ethan leaned over to whisper, You amaze me every day. Despite their busy schedules, Ethan and Hannah prioritized their family life. Evenings were sacred, spent reading bedtime stories to James or enjoying quiet dinners together. One night, as they tucked James into bed, he looked up at them with curious eyes. Mommy, Daddy, why do you help so many people? Hannah smiled, brushing his hair back. Because when someone helped us, it changed everything. And now, we want to do the same for others. James nodded thoughtfully. I want to help people too when I grow up. Ethan chuckled, kissing his son's forehead. You already do, buddy. To mark the foundation's 5th anniversary, a special event was held at the original Sinclair Evans Community Center. Hannah and Ethan were greeted with warm embraces and smiles from people whose lives they had touched. Emily, the single mother who had found employment through the center, approached them with her young son. I wanted to thank you again, she said, her voice thick with emotion. None of this would have been possible without you. Hannah hugged her tightly. You did the work, Emily. We just gave you the tools. During the celebration, an older man approached Ethan. His weathered face and hesitant demeanor hinted at a difficult past. I just wanted to say thank you, The man said, "Your program helped me find my footing again. I have a job now, and I'm reconnecting with my family." Ethan shook his hand, his voice filled with sincerity. "You're why we do this." As the man walked away, Hannah turned to Ethan. "Moments like that remind me why we started all this." Hannah's journey had come full circle. She often spoke at events, sharing her story to inspire others. During one such speech, she said, "There was a time when I thought my life had no value. But someone believed in me, and it changed everything. Now, I want to pass that belief on to as many people as I can." Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation. Back at home, Ethan and Hannah continued to nurture their growing family. They had recently adopted a 6-year-old girl named Lily, who had been living in foster care. James adored his new sister, often showing her around the house and including her in his adventures. One evening, as they sat together for a family movie night, Ethan looked around the room, his heart full. "This," he said quietly to Hannah, "is everything I ever dreamed of." Hannah smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It's more than I ever imagined." The couple faced one last challenge when a powerful corporation attempted to buy out the land, housing one of their community centers. Ethan and Hannah fought back, rallying community members and organizing a public campaign to protect the space. During a heated town hall meeting, Hannah stood before a crowd and delivered an impassioned speech. "This center isn't just a building," she said. "It's a lifeline for so many people. We can't let it be taken away." The community rallied behind them, and the corporation eventually backed down, solidifying the foundation's place in the neighborhood. As the foundation continued to thrive, Ethan and Hannah began mentoring young leaders to carry their vision forward. One mentee, a former resident of the community center, expressed her gratitude during a leadership seminar. "You've shown me that it's possible to turn pain into purpose," she said. "Thank you for believing in me." In the final scene, Ethan, Hannah, James, and Lily stood on the balcony of their home, watching the sun set over the city. Hannah held Ethan's hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We've built something beautiful, haven't we?" Ethan nodded, his eyes glistening. "We have, and it's only the beginning." As their children laughed and played around them, the couple reflected on the journey that had brought them here, a journey of love, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to making a difference. As the Sinclair Evans family stood together, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and gold, their journey reminded us all that love, resilience, and hope can overcome even the darkest moments. Their story is a testament to how acts of kindness and unwavering support can transform lives. What did this story mean to you? Did it make you believe in second chances, in the power of standing by the ones you love, or in building something bigger than yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what part of their journey moved you the most. And if this story touched your heart, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's so much more to come. Stories of redemption, courage, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Don't miss our next chapter of inspiration. Let's keep these stories alive together. See you next time, love.